at my shop today, and I got my rig out because my neighbor dropped off this John Deere tractor, and it's got this, what is it, Woodland Mills chipper on it. And about 2 years ago, he hasn't used this thing in 2 years, someone borrowed the tractor and was driving it between some trees, and ended up hitting the chute off a tree or something, and it cracked the chute, you know, almost all the way down. You can see my fingers right through there. So this is going to be a pretty easy repair. This is going to be grind, cut a little slit, you know, take out any of the old weld, put a come along across, tighten it up, pull it back to where it was, weld it, buff it, maybe spray some primer on it, and then it's good to go. So it's a John Deere H240. We got my F350 with a Lincoln Ranger 305. So that's what's going to be doing the welding. Okay, so the first step whenever working on a piece of equipment is to disconnect the battery. Now the reason is supposedly if you leave it connected, there's a chance the welding current could go through the tractor and fry some of the electrical connections as well as the computer inside of the tractor or crane or excavator, whatever you're working on. Now personally, I do this practice because, you know, I don't want to be liable for replacing a $5,000 computer in a piece of equipment. But I think it's a myth. I've never once heard of anyone ever frying anything on a piece of machinery because I didn't unplug the battery. But having said that, it takes usually 5 minutes to do, so might as well just do it. All right, let's start this thing. The bottom of the crack, I got to use a pencil grinder because the grinder won't fit, and I'm not going to be taking any of this stuff apart because I don't want to take the time to do that and then have to put it all back together. I'm not a mechanic, I'm a welder. Now we got to pull it tight because you can't weld it the way it is, obviously. So let's go right here. Now this come along is definitely overkill for this, but this is the only one I have, so. Oh, you know what? Let's go around those lines. Let's go right through here. There we go. There we go. Now for the rods, normally you would use like 70-18 for something like this. I'm going to use 70-10, which is a pipe rod. Normally a lot of people would use 60-10 for trying to punch through stuff. I love welding with 60-10, but it's very prone to cracking, and I don't like using it unless I'm welding on something really dirty or I'm welding open root pipe where it's meant to be used. Otherwise, if I have 70-10, I'll use 70-10 or I'll use 70-18. If I don't even carry this rod in my truck. I would normally just do this all with 70-18. Just using this 70-10 is going to make the job a little bit easier, and I already have it in my shop, so that's why I'm using that. But normally, yeah, you'd want to do this all with 70-18. Leave the 60-10 for pipe welding. So I also forgot to mention the other reason I'm using 7010 is because this is not very thick stuff. I mean, it's around 1/8 of an inch thick, and where it broke, it's even thinner because I had to grind some of it out. To weld up on thin metal like this, very hard to do with 7018. So welding down is much easier, so that's why I'm using this rod. This rod's actually designed to run down. This is a pipe rod, as I said, downhand pipe rod. So it's designed to weld down. It did a pretty good job. Okay, so the last thing here is to weld up here. This plate, this curved plate right here, that's like a 1/16 of an inch thick, which means it's, don't know, that means it's very, very thin. So I don't want to use a big rod or anything here. I'm going to use a 332, which is one size smaller than what I was using. So I'm going to use a 332 rod and try and stick this plate back to this one, and then I'll go over it with a hotter weld and fix it up. But you don't want to just go blasting there with a nice hot pass, because it's not going to connect anything. It's going to cut. It's not going to weld because this is too thin. Yeah, it's still too hot. Turn it down. There we go. Actually, funny story about this tractor is when they bought it, they didn't even know it was this big. But this is like a pretty decent sized agricultural tractor for a smaller farm. They use this to maintain a road and do snow plowing and stuff, and do some construction work at their camp property, the hunt camp. But it was cheaper to buy one of these than one of the smaller ones at auction, so they ended up with a giant one, which in my opinion in a lot of scenarios is actually better. All right, so now this piece is reconnected to that really thin plate, so now I can turn the heat up on the welding machine and put a nice weld in there. All right, so I finished the top off with some 7018. Then this is all downhand 7010 rod. See if I can knock out some of that glare so you can see it. Whew. Pretty decent welds. Definitely better than the factory. Okay, here we have a relative's tractor. I use this to redo my driveway. I have a gravel driveway. Use the blade to spread all the new gravel, but it's got a few issues that need to be addressed that are all welding related. Main issue here is that ball is supposed to be in this joint here, like it is over there, or up here. But yeah, it's not supposed to be like that. So we gotta take this arm here, I don't know what it's called, and weld on both sides and make it so that that ball stays in there. And then the fender on this thing isn't exactly in great shape either. I mean, it moves very freely. See the other side, much sturdier. This is supposed to sit up around on that ball, and then that pin retains it, but it's all broken here, so this just comes completely out. There we go. So here's the part. There's one that's in good shape. can see the ball thing stays in there. You can't pull that out. And there's that lip all the way around on the outside. And then, I don't know, there's not really a lip over here, but it's still small enough that it retains it. The lip is still there and it holds it in, but the other side, you can take it right out. So what I'm gonna do is put a weld around that circle, kind of leaning in a bit with the ball still in there. Hopefully lock it in place without completely seizing it up. It should still be able to move. To weld this up, we're going to be using a MIG welder. I got an Art Captain 200 here. I got a discount code for these in the description of the video. But the reason I'll be using MIG is because it's for this scenario. You could TIG weld this, you could stick weld it, or you can MIG weld it. It doesn't really matter. MIG here is going to be the easiest option for sure out of the three, and the fastest option. So that's why I'm using it. So there it is, finished. I just welded a ring around it. I had to pencil grind a bit on the first pass to make sure the ball still rotated all the way around, because that's how it's supposed to be, but can't get that out of there now, and that should last for quite some time. There's no point of even trying to fix this where it sits right now. The whole thing needs to be cut off. Oh. So the part that sits on the frame, that piece of tubing, is unsavable. It's got holes in it. You can break it apart with a screwdriver. And then the fender up there is pretty rotten. I don't really know what I'm going to do about that. That's way too much effort to properly fix it, and this is a tractor, so it doesn't really matter too much. So I have to cut the bottom off, build a new bracket for it to sit on, attach the bracket to the tractor, put the fender on, weld it to the bracket. Alright, so I didn't video it, but I just put this on. I used the old U-bolt from the other fender. Welded some bolts onto it with a little bit of extension there, and then this piece of angle iron. Bolted to it, and then we'll put the new fender on top there and mount it to that. You know, very basic. And we'll probably put a bracket from the edge of that down to this, because the original fender had that as well. Okay, so I'm sure some people are looking at this and they're like, man, this is kind of a hack job. And you'd be right, this is a hack job, what I'm doing right now, because this tractor's maybe worth $2,000. Also, it's mostly just used for grading driveways recently. And if it gets used at all, which it doesn't get used very often. And the fender was basically going to eventually fall off and either get ran over or break something else when it fell off. So the job is to make sure the fender stays on the tractor. That's it. Sometimes you just don't need to go spend a bunch of time, effort, and money on something that doesn't require it. So in this scenario, you know, I'm using scrap steel I already had. I'm not going to cut the whole bottom of the fender apart and completely fabricate a new bottom half from scratch. I'm not going to do that. It just needs to be on the tractor and stay there. Sometimes, you know, stuff like jobs don't require a ton of effort and time and money, as I mentioned. So this job, I'm not getting paid for this. I borrowed this tractor from a relative to do my driveway, and I'm just fixing a few things on it in return. Even for my paying customers, a lot of people don't seem to understand when they comment on some of my other repair videos that Customers don't want to spend a lot of money on things that aren't worth a lot of money. You could go spend 20 hours and use a bunch of brand new material on a job for a client, and you could absolutely piss them off because they didn't want that. They want a quick and fast repair. Quick, easy, cheap. Like I did a trailer leaf spring mount repair, and people were like, oh, you should have replaced that whole section of frame on that trailer. They got the trailer for free. The spring broke, the spring mount. They needed to put back on so that they could use the trailer the next morning. They don't have the time or money, or they don't want to leave it there for that amount of time and spend that much money to replace half a frame. Same thing with this. There's no reason to go cut the whole bottom of the fender off and build it from scratch. That's just not realistic for a lot of things. It completely depends what you're working on. The value of what you're working on and what it does depends how much money and effort you're going to put into the repair. So if you can't understand that, then don't even try starting your own business or doing repairs for other people, because you're going to be very disappointed when you find out a lot of people are trying to put minimal money and time into something and just get it to work. That's how business works. If you don't like it, then don't get into it. Okay, it's all done now. I just ended up putting some angle iron around here to stiffen up the backside. And I just welded it to this bracket that is for the 3-point hitch. I mean, ideally, I wouldn't have done that because I want, you can't remove the fender without cutting that off, but I doubt this fender's coming off anytime soon. It's pretty stiff actually. This side, back down to the original piece of angle iron, and then welded another piece to the step. Once again, you can't get the fender off without cutting that, but it's probably not coming off, possibly ever. So it all worked out pretty good, and that Art Captain MiG 200 working pretty good. So really like that welding machine. There you go. Now way stiffer than it was originally, and it's not going to fall off and get damaged or break something else.